Hello everyone. Today we have a really nice piece. This is the Kickstop, Lee Williams and John Barker collaboration, Impulse. I believe this model was made in 2021, or at least the Impulse model, and this is one of the only collaboration piece with John Barker of this model. So basically what happens, for those of you who watched my channel, you're already very familiar with, you know, probably Lee Williams, maybe less so on John Barker, because I don't show too many of his pieces. I've actually never owned any of his solo pieces, but that's besides the point. John, interesting thing is John has been very well known in the past for his Hokkaido model, and his grinds in general. The American Tanto grind that was inspired by Bob Lum. He really took it to heart and did some really beautiful designs, beautiful grinds, and although I think the design is really great, this piece is something that's very special, and I love that it has John's really great grinds, with a mix of Lee Williams's kickstop mechanism. And I think we should talk a little bit about the knife itself, and then I'll jump into more of a history, but I'll jump into that later on in the video in case any of you are interested. It won't be the history of the kickstop itself, but more of like a, in general, how it came about. So we're looking at, I believe, I'm not sure actually what blade steel this is. It's not marked anywhere. I believe it's CPM 154, or something similar to that performance, because that's what Lee usually uses. So that is the blade grind. It's got a very nice, downward swedge, hand rub finish, and then a really cool little recurve right here. And this model, really reminds me of Lee's Iceman, which is a great compliment, because the Iceman is actually one of my all-time favorite model from Lee. But the blade is, the blade grind is quite a bit different, and this one looks like a more modern, updated version of that. So you can see that, in the collaborations, and I believe this is how it usually happens, and also for this piece, Lee builds, the frame. So if you go look at his Instagram, there will be some pictures in collaboration knives where he builds like the frame, and the blade, and he tunes in the action from the start. So Lee would tune everything in, but the blade would not be, it would have like a rough shape of this, but it would not be grounded. Same with the frame, it would be, I think, shaped mostly like this already with all the parts fitted, but it, and the clip and everything, but it's not like fully finished off like this. So for example, like the texture on the bolster, or how it feels on the carbon fiber, that is all done by John Barker. So Lee does the initial build, so it's almost like a 50-50 work, because Lee does the initial work, putting everything together, making sure it fits right, and then John does the finishing, make sure the color is nice and vibrant, and making sure the grind is nice and beautiful. So that's why you see both makers mark right here in the blade. Very cool. And then on the other side, it's just completely plain. And going forward, The frame, the build is actually a bolster lock build, and if you try to go look at different collaborations and even Lee's solo knives, a kickstop with bolster lock is one of I think the rarest configurations that you can get. Usually they're just frame locks or liner locks, but bolster locks are my favorite. And a lot of makers, when they do the lock bar cutout that you can see right here, usually it's just one big hole gap here, and I think that's the conventional way of doing things. But what Lee does here is he does these little grills, which are also not very deep, which means compared to other knives, this I think is quite strong. Because if you think that a lock bar would fail, it would fail at the thinnest point. That's also what one of the conversations I had with a well-known knife maker said, that there's all these thick knives, all the normal ones and thinner ones. It's in terms of strength wise of the lock, they're all pretty much the same because it always will always break at the weakest point, which is here, and they're all generally around the same size cutout. No matter how thick or thin the this part of the liner is, this is the thing that would break. And if you go look at the Medfords and all the thick guys, those ones will have a very big cutout, so there would be a part of it that's super thin as something of this size. But what Lee does is these little grills, which I'm not a knife maker, but I think this is quite solid. This is something that makes his knives the action feel super nice and solid. Jumping onto the frame, there's a eggshell finish, very nice and scratch resistant, and very nice on the hand to feel, and a nice Zircuti pivot collar, and an S-curve bolster, which is not always the easiest to fit together. If you look at these seams, they did a great job on this. It's pretty much on point. The back spacer is also probably is the same material, Zircuti, in the clip and the back spacer, which very, very well finished. This piece is actually, it was an auction piece earlier in 2021. So that's why it's got quite a lot of these bling features on it. The nicely colored hardware, which the way John finished this, I bet this is just as scratch resistant as these eggshell bolsters, which is a good thing. I think like when Lee and John make knives, they're meant to be carried, and something beautiful like this won't go it won't like you can't really mar it up that much because it doesn't really scratch. The only thing that could potentially scratch a lot would be the blade, but at least the frame would stay nice and beautiful when it's closed. And it's not meant to, or at least I've seen people using Lee's Kickstop very extensively, like the whole blade is just covered with scratches and all those things, like tape and everything. But it's it's meant to be used, and the mechanism, jumping into the Kickstop, obviously you'd probably already know, but the reason why the Kickstop is so special is the feeling of it and how it works. So there's a flipper tab out front, and it disappears because it stays and acts as the stop pin when the blade closes. So that's a very neat feature. And I've heard people complain that, you know, sometimes it rattles around a little bit left to right. But I mean, reliability wise, I think this is one of the best. You know, I can't tell if it's because of the design of the kickstop or, but more importantly, I believe it's Lee's own tuning and his own fitment of the lock, um, or at least like how these two lock up together that makes it so solid and so special. You know, you don't need an extra stop pin because that is the stop pin on the flipper tab, and it makes the lines really beautiful on the open instead of having a really big flipper tab here. It's just nice and beautiful. And the closed, you know, a lot of knife YouTubers say that this would be a pocket pecker. I mean, for me, I never have an issue with that, even if I put, you know, my wallet or whatever in the same pocket. It makes it a lot easier to engage, feels much better, and flips really well. And part of the secret is, if you look how Lee makes his knives, the point at which the flipper tab lets go, you know, when your finger reaches the end, the angle is almost 90 degrees. You know, some of Lee's knives, it's even over here. And if you have a knife that has an angle that is so far out, you know, usually knives, when you completely move the flipper tab over, it's only opens this much, which means the detent has to be stronger or the knife has to be smoother to make it open all the way. But here your finger is in contact with the knife almost all the way to 90 degrees. And it makes it so easy to open that you cannot misflip this at all. Like, you know, even with your thumb, it fires pretty hard. I mean, like some knives only open that hard, and even with, you know, my middle finger, it's just incredible. It works so well because the angle is so good, and the knife is super smooth. So that is, you know, something that's just so apparent once you have the knife in hand. And this goes along with, you know, nearly every single kickstop that I've ever handled from Lee. And I've handled over 10 kickstops, and all of them kick very hard. At least the ones that are tuned by Lee. Some of them have a little bit of a softer action, but, you know, for those I've been able to send it back to Lee, and he took, I don't know, only it doesn't take him very long. You know, maybe an hour or less just to disassemble a knife, make the detent a little bit harder or the lock bar strength a little bit harder. He can tune it the way you like it. Some people like it to be super strong, so it flips out hard. Some people like the detent a little bit lighter, so you get, you know, the feeling of like the double action where it's like you hear when the blade releases and then when it locks up, kind of like a double click. So that's just, you know, if you have your own personal preferences, no matter how the way that if Lee tuned it or the other maker in the collaboration tuned it, you can always send it back to Lee if you're not happy with the action and tell him, hey, it's too hard or it's too soft. I've done it for both. One of them was too hard, so I had him soften it a bit, and then one of them was too soft, and he had to make it a little bit harder. So, and it always, you know, every time it comes back from Lee, it's just perfect to what I like. You know, he knows exactly how to make it so that people really enjoy his knives. And speaking of, you know, the action, it is always fires out so hard, right? And the lockup is perfect. If you notice, a lot of makers have angles of the lock bar that are angled like this. Um, and if I had to guess, those angles are better for when you're cutting into something and twisting. It makes the knife this it makes this lock bar not move as much. But what Lee thinks is the best way to do his locks is to make them flat. So they're quite flat here and flat on the blade as well. Um, and I mean, the strange thing is, even if I haven't used this knife that much yet, only a little bit. But if you do use it hard, in some of my older Iceman, I did use it a lot. It like the lock is just it's perfect. There's no stick even if you push down on it hard. When you cut something, when you do the lock release, absolutely nothing. Always, absolutely nothing. It's just so good. You just release it like that. It comes falling down, and it's always glass smooth. Such a great feeling. Really, really love this. I'll tell you a short story. I brought one of the, it was a Daniel Galloway collab to the ocean, and I took some pictures with it, and somehow, during my trip, sand got into it, and then it kind of jammed up the knife, so when I closed it wouldn't close. So I wrote to Lee, hey, how should I fix it? The way he replied was, run some water, put some soap in it, and just run it right through, around the pivot area, the D10 area, and just flip it a few times, shake it out, blow it dry. If you have an air canister, it should be fine after that. And believe it or not, it works perfectly. I don't even have to put in new lubrication on the pivot or the D10. It works as if nothing has happened. So that's how it's so well tuned, because some knives, if you put water or you get oil on the lock bar, it the lock mechanism, it just reacts immediately. It doesn't like that. But this one, no matter what you do, you can still flip it open, close it, use it, whatever. I mean, for me, having a lock face that's meant to support the flipping of the knife is way better, because I don't really hard use it that much. I mean, you would cut something, but you wouldn't hard use something like this, right? And of course, with every single knife from Lee, the centering is perfect. You don't have to worry about cleaning it or taking it apart, even though the screws are such that you would be able to. It's Loctited, and I've never had to take any of these knives apart, because they always stay centered. They always stay perfect. They you know they, it's just flawless mechanically. You can get gunk inside. You can always water and soap, and like Lee said, water and soap and blow air so it's dry inside and doesn't rust. That's all you need, and it's gonna run perfectly like new again. So that's the magic of Lee's knives. And recently, um, I think recently his market, both Lee and John's market, dropped quite significantly. I mean, 2-3 years ago, let's say 2017 or earlier, 2015, those two were at the top of the knife game, even 2013 even. And Lee has been at the top since 2009. He was one of the original makers that everyone strived to get. And the reason was his actions were so good with the Kickstop. It was like nothing else. So they were really, his knives were so popular back then. You wouldn't be able to get your hands on one at all. It was so hard to find. And I remember, when I first tried to find Lee's knives, they were really grossly expensive. But flash forward to 2011, or sorry, 2021, the prices come down quite significantly. I'm not saying that they're cheap now, but they're much more affordable than they were even 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Same thing with John Barker's knives, but I don't want to spend too much time on that just because I have not owned his solo piece. Um, and so I wanted to focus this video about Lee, because Lee, is very interesting. I asked myself, hey, what happened with Lee? I still know that he has a lot of loyal followers, but what happened? And this might be a little bit more controversial, but before, Lee used to swear by going with customs only, made in the USA only. But several things happened that really affected his market. The first thing was that he started doing workshops where he invited basically his collectors, and even I got invited, but I was never able to attend. I live abroad, so I didn't really get to experience any of that. But from what I've heard from the people who go there, they get one of the best experiences ever, because it is a workshop to teach you how to build one of these kickstops. And at first it was a nice idea, but later on he started building knives which are his own models, and it has dress materials like Damascus and Damasteel, which to me that used to be an auction piece that would be worth over $10,000, easily over $10,000. And then you could simply go to a workshop where he'll prepare a lot of the stuff for you, and you can you do your own heat anodizing, or a little bit of grinding, but essentially you get almost, I've never handled any one of those because they're supposedly made by people who go to the workshop themselves, and it's a great experience. I don't doubt that, but you're essentially getting a really beautiful dress piece that someone else paid 10,000, but you pay 1,000 or 2,000 to join that workshop, and it's made by you and Lee, so there is even more special connection in that piece than just buying it off the auction table, right? So that, I think that really hit the market hard for Lee's secondary prices. And one of the other things, if I have to use an example, specific example, let's say there was a show where Lee did a collaboration with Jeremy Marsh on Jeremy's most famous model called the Vanquish, a Kickstop Vanquish, and it had a beautiful Damascus scale, and I believe either Damasteel or hand rub blade. I believe it was like a Damasteel or some sort of Damascus. And then right after the show, maybe a few months, but less than like 6 months, I'm pretty sure, you see the exact same one done in a workshop, a collaboration model which is done in a workshop, finished the same way, which, I mean, I feel bad for the guy who bought it for over 10K. I distinctly remember it went for over 10K. It was closer to like 12 or something like that, which is a heck lot, a boatload of money. And someone just goes to the workshop and basically makes the same knife. I mean, it's not done by Lee's or Jeremy's hand, it's done by your hands, but I mean, imagine you're the guy who just bought the auction knife off the table, and you see someone getting a very similar thing to you, how does that feel? that doesn't. I'm pretty sure that doesn't feel very good. So that's the first reason. A big ramble. The second reason is that Lee started to um, license his Kickstop mechanism, and he worked with the most frequent one is with Recon One's Wingman EDC. So that's the brand name is called Wingman EDC, and they make a bunch of collaboration knives with other makers, such as I believe there was the Jonas Iglesias. The first one ever was the Tom Mayo Dr. Death Kickstop. I did get my hands on that one. It was made by Riyadh, using the Kickstop design, but and I think that contributed a lot to um, dropping the secondary market prices, because now in order to experience a Kickstop, the legendary Kickstop, you only need to pay less than $500 to get one in your hand, made by Riyadh, which is already very well known for their quality, their fit and finish, and I thought that was quite a big blow to his market, and a disappointment to collectors who are more faithful to his original work. And it was painful to watch the market go down. But I guess Lee has to make money to support his family, and no doubt that that is something that he feels is right to do. So I won't question that. But as a collector, and I know other collectors who feel this similarly, that it doesn't feel very, it doesn't feel perfect, but anyways, I think those two reasons are mainly why the market dropped even by half or even more than what Lee used to be at. And I to be honest, I've stayed off of Lee's knives. I've been on and off, but I've never kept one for very long, and that was the main reason why. But when I got this piece in hand, because the price was so much lower, like, I mean, this would have been, I got it for at least 50% less than it would have been like 2 or 3 years ago. So that's why I decided, you know what, I'm gonna have another go. It's a collaboration piece. At least if someone wants to have Lee build something, it's not as easy because you have to also send it to John to grind it. But once I have it in hand, I'm thinking Lee used to be so famous because of his actions, but nowadays everyone's using bearings and they have great actions too. Especially the Riyadhs and those Chinese guys. And I have a few of those knives, but I haven't handled the Kickstop for a while. But when I took it, flipped it, saw how beautifully finished it is, closed it, I thought, you know what, Lee's knives are still special. They're still very, very well made, and I think handling the Chinese made Kickstop, those ones have proportions which are a bit odd. They don't feel as good. The D10's not tuned right. It was too stiff. It was too rough. It's just not the same, and it doesn't have the same feeling as flipping a custom. So before I thought it used to be very close, because those knives are very smooth and well made. But you know what? There is a market difference between a Lee 2 knife versus anything else that anyone does. It still feels unique. It is a special piece. So yeah. I just wanted to end the video at that. I hope you found it interesting. And yeah, have a great rest of the day or night. And thank you for watching. See you next time.